Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Normal Public Library Virtual Cafe on Saturday, July 11th, 2020. This is Poetry is Normal Presents. This is the guest poet reading series supported by the Normal Public Library Foundation, as well as the library itself. I'm Kathleen Kirk. I work at the library. John Fisher is our Zoom room virtual cafe host, and he is broadcasting our event on Facebook Live, and later he will prepare it for the Normal Public Library's YouTube channel, so you can come back and listen again. Our guest poets today are Richard Jones and Christopher Watkins. And what I'll do is tell you a little bit about both of them, and then I'll turn it over to them. Richard Jones's most recent book of poems is Avalon from Linden Press, which is just out as of June. His many poetry collections include Stranger on Earth and The Blessing, both from Copper Canyon Press. Editor since 1980 of the literary journal Poetry East. He curates its many anthologies such as Paris, The Last Believer in Words, and Bliss. In the autumn of 2020, he will publish Poetry East's 100th issue. Christopher Watkins is a poet and a PhD candidate at Florida State University. He received his MFA at DePaul University, studying with Richard Jones, and he's the assistant editor of Poetry East. Christopher will read for us now and tell us anything else he wants us to know about himself and his poems.
Thanks, Kathleen. I'm just gonna shoot right in. This is a poem called Bard, and this poem is dedicated to my wife, Shannon. Bard. Her lips are salt, and to my delight, she talks death and beauty all day, funeral flowers all night. Her lips are salt, and to my delight, she speaks in waves that break and spray across a man, that swell his sight. She talks death and beauty all day. Her lips are salt and my delight. I have a manuscript that hopefully will be out sooner rather than later. But it begins with that poem, and it talks a lot about marriage, marital love, and delight just in general. And I think my marriage is one of my biggest delights. So this is another poem about marriage. This one is maybe a little more complicated or less purely joyful in the sense of the word joy that people often think of, but I think joy is often a really hard thing, something that people need to struggle for, and that's what makes it worth having. Which is important at a time like this, I think, especially, that we need to continue to struggle for joy. The epigraph for my book is by Dorothy Day, and it's we are called to the duty of delight, and I think that delight definitely is our duty, and it's hard to keep up delight, but it's important to do. So this one is called Marriage, and it's a terza rima sonnet. Marriage. Today I am the lightning, you the pole. Our anger even needs the other there. Tomorrow you will rain, I'll be a hole. You are the boots when I'm the treaded stair. I speak like salt to wear away your ice. I scrape my face until your windshield's bare. You beat yourself upstream against the race of me and scuffle through my shallow waters. Head up, you tread my lake in skull embrace of me who's hitting all your nails a little harder. You're slow about your sawing through my boards. We're plastering one bother onto bother. But ours is not a house stacked out of cards. It's a solid place with a bedroom and a yard. So that one is also very inspired by, I don't remember the poet now, but he has that poem where it's, you can nail my left hand to the left cross beam and my right hand to the right, but I need someone, I need a help, a love, a you, a wife. I don't remember whose poem that is. It's a beautiful poem though. I'll think of it eventually. The next one is another poem about delight, and this one's a pretty simple poem. It's just 37 Reasons to Delight is the name of the poem, and it gives you 37 reasons to delight. Apple blossoms, billy buttons, columbines and coral bells, dianellas, dragon's tongues, daisies, daphnes, daffodils, echinacea, foxgloves, flannels, gingers, heathers, hyacinths, irises and Jacob's ladders, jonquils, jasmines, labyrinths, dahlias and morning glories, monkshoods, nerines, oxeye daisies, poppies, pansies, Quaker ladies, red-hot pokers, snowdrops, tulips, ulixes, and violas, woolly violets, xyruses, yellow flags, yellow roses, and zinnias, these delights right under our noses. Like I said, I really enjoy delight. I mean, who doesn't? But at the same time, it's very hard to keep up delight. It's hard, especially now, as I said, but it was hard in the past too. And so this poem kind of speaks to that. It's called "It's Hard to Make a Poem," and it's one of those poems that has quotes around it, around the title. It's a dialogue poem. It's a dialogue between myself and my wife. So "It's Hard to Make a Poem" is my first line, in addition to being the title of the poem. It's hard to make a poem. Maybe you should be a poem, my wife says, and let it all be joy. Your left leg could be a line, and your right leg too. Your stuck-out tongue will be the line that makes people smile. Your arms could be a line, and you could have a line just for your fingernails. Your head, she grins, should get a whole stanza, because it thinks so highly of itself, and because it's always off somewhere on its own. Yes, I say, as the dog noses closer on the couch. And there should be a line or two about the dog, how she always lies here with us. A line about her good paw smell, a line that she licks. You could have a few lines about the reading light beneath the window where your brown chair sits, how you love it best in the early morning. Yes, I say, and there should be a line in which I tell you that I love you. Some say love is out of fashion in poems, so I will be out of fashion, which suits me fine. There will be a line for your belly button, a line for your teeth, the line in which you cry and I am not there to see, the line lying on the bed, and then the line lying on the floor, the line in which we drink wine until we can drink no more, lines about ordinary days, in which we are happy to be with one another and speak of unimportant things. Yeah. I think that's important, to speak of unimportant things. It's very important. I think that's maybe my highest calling. I just recently moved to Florida. I know that this is a reading that is in some ways taking place in Illinois, and in some ways it is not. But I'm originally from Illinois. I'm originally from Southern Illinois, but I've lived in Chicago for the past 5 years. And when I was in Chicago, one of my favorite things to do, the thing that I think, one of the things, other than the Art Institute, the thing that I missed most about being in Chicago during quarantine was taking the L. The L is a magical place. I once saw a man in sweatpants and a hospital gown with no shirt drinking a bottle of malt liquor on the L. And it was the most it's just an incredible place where things that happen that would never happen anywhere else happen on the L. And I think it's a very meditative place. It's the place that I think is the most democratic place in all of Chicago. And it really makes you feel like you're in a city when you are taking the L in a really beautiful way. And so this poem is called Walking to the L. I wrote this in a class with Richard, actually. This is, I think, the first poem that I ever wrote that right when I wrote it, I was like, yeah, that's a good poem. Wow. So I thank Richard for that, especially. Walking to the L. I take it slow down Montana Street. I have someplace to go, but I am trying not to think about that. Because I am walking now, biting grapes off the green bunch I hold in my hand like a hooked fish. Spitting grape seeds in the grass beside the sidewalk as I stroll. I am trying not to think about what will be on the block ahead of me or whom I might run into. I am trying to enjoy this red house with its chipped paint. I am trying to listen to the songs of chickadees without wondering what my wife or my mother or my boss or my dog might be doing. But it is hard work. So I take it slow down the street, letting stray thoughts walk off a ways in front of me. Yeah. Like I said, I just recently moved to Florida, and the thing that I was most excited about on my move to Florida was, among other things, I guess, but one of the things I was most excited about was not going to, the PhD program that I got into, or, going to the beach. I just really wanted to see an alligator really, really badly. And I saw my first alligator just a couple of days ago. And it was the most amazing thing in the world. So this is my most recent poem that I'll be reading, and it's called Alligator Poem. It surfaces with the gentle splash of a pool floaty coming up from under the water. Its back is as innocent as a cheese grater, and not unlike a child with a pair of scissors. Its 100 million years of teeth trim the edges of the river in search of the place that it is most like a log. With the patience of one who outlasts glaciers, it waits here in sunny Florida, where the air is sweet as orange juice and evening comes on like the seeds of a papaya, watching for the egret that will drop out of the trees like a heap of heavy snow, sliding from a pine in some northern forest, like the return of some long ago era when the whole world was slow and gentle and crusted over in ice. In the course of writing that poem, I had to look up, like, when did alligators come about? Like, how old are they? And also, how did they survive the Ice Age? And I still don't know how alligators survived the Ice Age. It is the mystery that I will be thinking about for the rest of my life. Yeah, I really can't tell you. And the next poem I'm going to read is maybe a simpler poem. It's called Little League. And it's about baseball. I think kids take baseball a lot more seriously than we give them credit. And I think that play is a really serious thing to kids. So this is Little League. As the lanky pitcher, bent over, brings the ball from behind his back into his glove, standing upright as he does, the batter brings the bat up from his shoulder and lightly twirls the aluminum barrel behind his helmet, waiting for the pitch. The catcher, meanwhile, shifts his feet in preparation for the fastball he is called for. The first baseman, the coach's son, punches the pocket of his mitt as if to make himself certain no error-causing hole has appeared. As the runner on second increases his lead, taking bunny hops while the shortstop bends low, as the pitcher lets go of the ball and the batter's eyes widen. The right fielder has just discovered two grasshoppers having sex, one behind the other, fluttering and flying over the green grass as they go. This next poem is this one's for my mother and my father, who are actually here right now. This is the first time I was able to see them since quarantine began, so it's very nice. We had an oak tree in my backyard when I was a kid, and I think it's dying now, which is really sad because I view it as this sort of symbol of my childhood. But I think there's some sort of tree disease going around in addition to all of this human disease. But alas, this poem is called Trimming. I told my mother dozens and dozens of times I was going to trim the power lines after the electric men drove the alley behind our house and from their white cherry-picking booth cut off the back round of my oak, disfigured my perfectly globe-crowned oak, a world-made hemisphere, the bad kind of joke that is all punchline, as if they'd never been boys who loved to climb, as if instead of birth, they dug themselves up into our world from under stones and did not understand the way that storms test the strength of branches, did not understand the way grown men, my father, love their trees, as if they did not understand any human thing, unkind, unnatural, faithless, and deplorable men. Who would let them live in our town? Was there not something of theirs that we could cut down? I wanted to be even. My mother would smile at my frustration, which made me angrier. But she would just smile at my whole body and tell me the tree would grow. And I think I've got time for maybe 2 more poems. I've got a short one, a couple short ones actually. This one is just a one stanza poem called Emily. It goes, poems can be like stones and be mutable as ashes. That's why the best, most human poems all end in dashes. And I'm just realizing that this poem doesn't work as well without the visual of all the dashes through the poem. But yes, as those of you who love Emily as I do will know, she loved her dashes. My final poem is called Thus Far. And I just want to thank everybody for having me. I want to thank Kathleen and John and Richard. Thank you all for having me, and thank you to everybody who is on Facebook with us listening. So yeah, thus far. Well, here I am. I must be nearing something. Shoes wet to the sock, my feet goose bumping. But I've come this far. Some rain is not going to turn me. I passed the 10-mile marker coming down the hill. My back is heavy. The wind is chill against my cheek. I'll feel this walk in my legs for a week. But it's so good to keep going. I love not knowing when or where or why I might end up stopping. It makes everything else seem so much less. So I just keep walking. Thanks. I'll turn it over to Kathleen and to Richard.
Okay. Chris, thank you so much. I have to say that was a sheer delight. We can talk more about delight later. And I have to tell you, as a child, I lived in Gainesville, Florida, and a particular alligator was a big part of my life. So it was lovely to hear about your connection. Thank you so much. That was Christopher Watkins that you've been listening to. And now we're going to hear from our other guest poet, Richard Jones, who has a new book out, Avalon. He's the editor of Poetry East, and he teaches at DePaul University. Richard Jones, you're up.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Chris. John, thanks for hosting us here in the Zoom room. It's always great to hear poems, but I think especially to hear poems of joy and delight really are so necessary and so wonderful to listen to and to experience, especially during this strange season of sheltering in place and loneliness for some people. So joy is always number one on the agenda and should always be number one on the agenda. So Chris, thank you so much. It was a beautiful reading, as I knew it would be, and I'm so glad everyone got to hear it. Also just want to say thank you to Kathleen, who also brings so much joy to everything she does. She's a wonderful poet. Originally, we were going to have this reading in the library. And so we would have the reading and the people in Normal would come and we'd all get to know one another. And then we'd have tea and cookies and, you know, share conversation. But instead, Kathleen is indefatigable and cannot be defeated. So we have our Zoom room meeting, our Zoom reading here, Poetry is Normal, which gets to include people from all over. So hello to people in Virginia, hello to people in California. So good for you, Kathleen. Thank you so much. I thought I'd read a poem I believe in show and tell. So this is a book called The Obscure Hours, and it's a book of translations that I did. And I thought I'd begin with a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke, because during this time of COVID and sheltering in place and being alone for many, many people, what I've found is that when I do encounter people or talk to people, people are maybe more sympathetic, more empathetic, more kind, and more generous than ever before. And I think you think of COVID as being something so terrible, but it's been a revelation to me of just, the fact that the human spirit really is quite lovely. And so here's a poem by Rilke that shows that we're all in this together. It's called Grave Hour. Who weeps now somewhere in the world, weeps for no reason in the world, weeps for me? Who now laughs somewhere in the night, without reason laughs in the night, laughs at me? Who now goes somewhere in the world, without reason goes in the world, goes to me? Who now dies somewhere in the world, without reason dies in the world, looks at me? So I'm going to read today from my new book, which is called Avalon. And again, I like to show the cover. It's so pretty. And it's a little house that Renoir painted, and it's called The Little House. And I thought, and Avalon is the title. It's from Linden Press, which is run by a wonderful poet named Christopher Nelson. And he's just does such a lovely job. He has a wonderful journal called Under a Warm Green Linen. And I'm so much in his debt for bringing out such a beautiful book. I thank him. But I thought I'd read the epigraph, which is a little something my daughter said, which is where the title of the book comes from. Let's call our home Avalon, Sarah, my daughter said, after the island where apple trees are ever flowering and kings are healed of their wounds. So when you name your house Avalon, it becomes a pretty magical place, and pretty much anything can happen there. So this first one is called Purple Potatoes. And I don't know where I'd been all these years, but I'd never seen a purple potato in my life until about 3 or 4 years ago when my wife served them up at dinner one evening. And I thought, purple potatoes, where have you been all my life? So anyway, this is a poem called Purple Potatoes, and it sort of speaks to the tenor of what can go on here in Avalon. Purple potatoes. I was enjoying a snack of purple potatoes when an angel appeared at the table. We angels don't covet the ways of men, neither your sins nor your appetites. But your potatoes look quite delicious, and the purple flesh is most beautiful. Can you tell me what it is to eat a bowl filled with purple potatoes? It is good, I said. My body is satisfied, and my soul is nourished by the color. The angel nodded, considering my words. I offered to share, to serve the angel a plate, but the angel raised his hand to say no. Purple is the color of mystery and ambiguity, I went on, feeling the need to explain further. Homer's heroes wore cloaks of Tyrian purple. Titian and Raphael painted angels in rich and regal purple robes. Then I noticed my angel's robe was the green of his wings. Purple potatoes, the angel said, a little sadly, before disappearing back into the light. Yes, I said, loudly to the air, looking around and wagging my fork. But still, they're just potatoes. And when the angel did not return, I finished my meal, enjoying each purple bite as I scraped and polished the white plate clean. So I know that there's probably a lot of writers listening in. And one thing that writers always talk about with one another is where do you write? Where do you like to write? And some people like to go out to cafes to write, and some people have beautiful studies with tall bookshelves and ladders. And my favorite place to write, especially when the weather is like it is now, is outside on the back deck. So the setting of this poem is my little writing space on the back deck in the back garden, on the table under a big red umbrella. And in it, a blackbird comes to have a little conversation with me. So the poem is called Encounter. The eighth blackbird landed before me on the iron table under the big red umbrella. The wings quivered, stilled, then folded slowly, elegantly. Yellow rings circled the eyes, which were two black pearls. The seven others perched on the fence in the evening garden, keeping their counsel as dusk fell. A glass of wine turned purple in the last light. Then the eighth blackbird spoke, not words, but in a lingua franca I could understand easily, like poetry. The blackbird told me last winter it nested in snowy mountains and had been a friend to eagles. I said, last winter I visited Paris. Hopping a bit closer, the blackbird apologized if his early dawn song had bothered me. I said, no, I was grateful to wake to music, though I found the song sad. He told me he had lost his mate and he was mourning life's brevity, adding that after every rainstorm, he still sings songs to the fresh air. Then he asked how I could stand it, not having wings. It's a miracle you survive, he said, sitting on your deck with purple wine in the twilight. His eyes flashed, his gaze fixed me. Flying is quicker than human thought, he said, as if I should know this truth. I said I had no reply to such a mystery and waited, anticipating a revelation, but the bird simply wished me well and took off, lifting away so suddenly I started and could not breathe again until long after the pearl-eyed blackbird had vanished into the sun's last light beyond the weeping willow I planted. House. On the coldest day of winter, I shut off the furnace. It's early morning, icy. I'm alone in the chilled house and glad. Soon the room is cold enough that sitting at my writing desk, I can see breath clouds when I blow on my hands to warm them. I go upstairs and pile every blanket in heavy layers on the big bed. I crawl in and pull the covers over my head. I want to stay here until spring comes, when I shall rise and go out looking for something to eat. But that's not how it happens. My wife and daughter come home and shake me, telling me the house is freezing and asking if I'm crazy. I have a very lovely family who puts up with me, my writing, and my crazy ways. So this last poem for right now from Avalon is called The Earth. And it's simply that desire that I think a lot of us have to go up as high as we can and get that really high perspective on planet Earth, to really get the long view. And I really love that notion of being up either in a high skyscraper or on a mountaintop or on a cliff's edge. But the only problem is that whenever I find myself in those places, I feel my knees starting to go weak in this really strange impulse to leap. And I think probably a lot of us have that impulse. So this is called The Earth. And don't be worried. It's a comforting poem in the end, but we have to get through it. The earth. Whenever I stand on some height, a roof's edge or a balcony far above the street, I think about jumping. Beneath the endless dome of the sky, I can't not picture it, the body twirling in space as it drops. I look down from a tower or rampart, and the thought alone makes my knees go weak and fills my head with vertigo. And yet, I can't help myself. On a cliff's crumbling ledge, I'll lean forward until I lose my balance and start to fall. Then the windmills of my arms wing me backward until I regain my footing on the earth, which is neither round nor spinning, I tell my pounding heart, but flat and perfectly safe for me to stand on. So I'm going to read from another book called Stranger on Earth. And this is a book I put out with Copper Canyon about 2 years ago. And I love the illustration on the cover. It's by Picabia. And the name of the painting, you'd never guess it unless you knew it, but it's called The Love Parade. And to me, that's very much what writing poems is, just a kind of endless love parade. And so the poem I'm going to read is actually a love poem for my wife. And the poem's called Eggplant. And eggplant is by far and away my wife's favorite food. And unfortunately, it's not a favorite of mine. So such is marriage, such is marriage. But the poem is called Eggplant. I've never liked the taste, which I think is a shame, because some days when my wife goes to work and I walk to the grocery store, I stand in the produce aisle, admiring those gorgeous purple fruits, wine-colored, sensuously curved, and can't help but reach out and pick one up just to hold it. So silky smooth, so luscious looking, I almost fall in love. But then remember who I am, a man not fond of eggplant. Nonetheless, I linger and look, and there in the bin, under the misters and lights, I find it, the perfect eggplant, the glossy flesh unblemished, meat firm under the fingers, the stem and cap bright green. The fruit heavy in the hand, I place the eggplant in my cart, taking special care, knowing an eggplant is delicate and wounds easily. I carry the grocery bag home through a light rain and arrange the eggplant on a white tablecloth, the opulent purple orb lustrous in the window light and quietly beautiful as if lying on satin sheets. Then I sit in the wing chair. The house grows dark and the rain falls harder as I wait for my wife to come home from work, shake off her raincoat, turn on the lamp, and behold the eggplant. So I'm very lucky. I have a wonderful family of 5, my wife Laura and our 3 children, William, Andrew, and Sarah, but I feel doubly lucky to live with 2 really beautiful women, my wife and my daughter, Sarah. The problem with having 5 people in the family is that trying to coordinate everyone's schedule in order to take a family vacation can get really complicated. And so last year we just couldn't find a time where everyone was free. So my daughter Sarah and I decided that we weren't going to be stopped, and we decided to go, just the 2 of us, to Paris. And as you might imagine, it was probably one of the most special weeks of my life. There's nothing quite like daddy-daughter time. And when we went, it was a wonderful occasion. We got to visit all the sites in Paris, all the places you want to see, including Notre Dame. And I want to thank Kathleen, who published this poem in her wonderful journal, Escape into Life. I always love when I appear in Escape into Life. It's such a just fantabulous journal. I really just love it so much. But the week we went there, we spent a lot of time in Notre Dame, and it turns out that it was the week just before Notre Dame burned. So we came back from Paris having had the most wonderful time, and then came home to the most awful news. So I feel really lucky that I was able to share all of these experiences with my daughter, and it's something that I know neither of us will ever forget. And so this is Notre Dame, which I know is going to come back bigger and better and more beautiful than ever. Notre Dame. My daughter and I traveled without our family, visiting the week before the church burned. We stayed in a good hotel on the left bank and walked everywhere, Des Rolles, Lauderey, all the places a father wants his daughter to see. We spent the morning in the church. Sarah told the story of Joan of Arc, the French heroine burned at the stake by the English at the age of 19. We lit a candle beneath her monument. After we came home, Palm Sunday, I told friends if our Paris trip could have been any sweeter, I didn't know how. Then, when the news came, with images of the conflagration and the spire collapsing, Sarah found me, taking sanctuary in my study. She had her phone and showed me a picture, the floor of the nave in ruins with piles of charred roof beams, ashes, and broken stones. But look, she said, the altar's gold cross still stands. She quickly took the phone back and asked if I knew the French word apiculture. She told me it's the French word for beekeepers, and beekeepers maintained colonies of bees on the roof of Notre Dame. The honey of the Holy Spirit, I asked. She said, honeybees thrive on many roofs in Paris, and showed me the old train station of the Musée d'Orsay, the gilded dome of the Opera Garnier, and even the glass roof of the Grand Palais. The wrath of the fire could not be stopped, and the flames roared. But the thick black smoke simply made the bees drunk and sleepy. When they awoke, it was a new day, and the bees were alive. So I'll finish with one last poem from Avalon, and it's the first poem in the book, and it's called On Living. And I'll preface it with just a comment. I've been teaching this summer for the first time on Zoom. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this Zoom reading on a Saturday afternoon. What a lovely thing to do. I've been very surprised teaching on Zoom just how intimate the relationships can be with my students. I think even in the classroom, if you ask someone, how are you doing today? They're usually going to say, I'm doing fine. But I find that on my Zoom meetings, if I ask someone, how are you doing? You're going to hear really how they're doing. And there have been lots of poems this spring about loneliness and sadness and despair. And we talk about them and we read them, but what we all agree on is that we don't want to stay there. Suffering is not the point. The point is to get over the suffering, to work our way through it together, and to get to a place like in Chris's poems of delight and joy. We do the work of the world. We participate in the world. We do our bit to help make the world the best place we can be. But at the end of the day, we sing our songs. And so this is a poem called On Living. On Living. First, you must suffer for 1,000 years. Then you must renounce suffering and dedicate yourself to joy. Your hands empty, wanting nothing, You will wander in a forest of silence, and when at last you speak, your first word will be yes or grasshopper. You will learn to tread on high towering clouds and to fall, simple as a stone, to plummet and tumble straight down. On your knees, with a wire brush, you will scrub the marble floor of the world, and at day's end, wash your cracked hands at a wooden trough. Though all is waste and desolation, the moon will rise from desert sands and cast light and shadow on your old draft horse, your painted wagon and black tent with its wool blankets. When the hour's late and nothing more can be done, treasure the stillness and peace of the firelight and sing your song. So we all may be gypsies, but we're all in this world together and on the journey together. So again, thank you to Kathleen and to John for holding our Zoom reading. And thank you so much for Chris. It's a great honor to read with you. And I'll turn it back to Kathleen now.
Richard, thank you so much. Really enjoyed your poems. Christopher, thank you. I hear, of course, the connection between you, Chris, in your epigraph, the duty to delight, and the delight present in your poems. Richard, you reminding us of our duty to sing our songs and your own dedication to joy, and that will follow the suffering, or we can dedicate ourselves to that after the suffering. So thank you so much. Lovely to hear the links. Even the grasshoppers were in both of your and the duty to delight in the delight of the purple potatoes. All of that's wonderful. I might ask you both, so either of you can answer. And Chris, feel free to unmute yourself now. I think we can, there's few of us, so we can have a little conversation. The delight and the joy in the poems that you presented today that were already written is evident. Have you been able to write during the time that we've been sheltering in place and worried about each other's suffering? Has the writing still been happening for you?
Chris?
So yes, yes and no. Definitely I'm still writing. I think it is harder to write during COVID. I think that that's a real, people talk a lot about writer's block, and like Richard, I don't believe in writer's block. I believe in bad poems. So I've written a lot of bad poems over quarantine. But I think that's the duty part of that phrase, the duty to delight. That you have to put in the hours in order to find that small bit of writing that's going to turn into a great poem. So in a time like this, it gets harder and harder than it already is. But it was already hard before, to find those little moments. So I think now more than ever, we're called to do that. We're called to put in the time and to find little moments of delight.
Great, thank you. What about you, Richard? Have you been writing through it or waiting or what?
Yes, I think it's interesting for everybody to go through this period, but certainly interesting for writers because one thing we know about ourselves is that there's a necessary solitude and solitariness to being a writer. It's something you do. You go into your room, you close the door, or even if you're out in a cafe and writing, you're still in that room of your head. So you'd think that we would be very good at knowing what it's like to be a hermit, knowing what it is to shelter in place, knowing what it is to go through a lonely period. But I think that's something that we all share. And I think that what we find as writers is what Chris was talking about, is that there is that duty to still, do the work and find the joy. When I was a kid, believe it or not, I was a surfer, and surfing takes a lot of energy just to paddle out beyond the shoreline. And then you sit there and you wait for waves. And there's nothing more frustrating than sitting and no waves are coming. And it feels like you sit there for a lifetime, but some days you paddle out and the waves are coming, and then you just pick them up and ride them. So I haven't really found that in terms of writing that life is very much different. There's the daily work, the scrubbing the marble floor of the world, and you wash your hands at the trough at the end of the day, and you've done your part to keep the world turning and to beautify it. But every now and then you do catch that wave, and you just find a lot of gratitude. And what happens with the wave is that it lifts you, and poetry and the writing lifts you and takes you to some new place, some new shore. And for that, you can only be grateful. So I think that's an important lesson for all of us to keep in mind, before COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, that I think that's a constant thread that kind of runs through all our lives. And we all experience it a little bit differently, but certainly as writers, there's that occasional reward of the poem that lifts you like a wave and carries you to shore. So I'm grateful for that.
Wonderful. Chris, you read your short Emily poem, and don't worry, we heard the dashes, but it would be especially delightful also to see the dashes on the page. I also heard a lot of rhyme, some repetition. You're writing in some forms. Would you like to tell us about that, or how you're incorporating form?
Yeah, I'm in love with forms. The middle section of my manuscript is 14 sonnets. And then there are other sonnets throughout the book. I think today I read like a couple like bastardized versions of the sonnet, but I love playing with forms, and I love writing in strict forms. I think that a lot of poets are afraid of like more traditional forms, like the sonnet, because they were taught them in grade school and high school, and were taught them really rigidly. But they're a great jumping off point. They're a great way to get outside of writer's block, which I really don't believe in. If you can physically put the pen to paper, then you cannot have writer's block. If you can spell halfway decently. I think forms are a great way to not only just get out of like your basic thought processes, but a way to elevate you into a different headspace. And I think they're really great. Yeah.
It's great. I was one of Richard's students as well in the past, and he introduced me to the term open sonnet or broken sonnet. And I fell in love with forms as well. I've loved forms from childhood poetry where everything rhymes and you learn about those things. And my mother was an English teacher. But I also loved learning about what, as a contemporary poet, you can do to free up or open up the form, even while you're letting the form be the thing that's rooting you and elevating you, as you say. What about you, Richard? How does form inform you? The poems we heard from you today seem more conversational and discursive, but would you like to comment on form in a general way?
Sure. Well, as you both have confessed, you were both my students, and you know that I taught a lot of sonnets. And so for me, and I write a lot of sonnets, but for me, it's also the act of reading, to read and to recognize that poetry especially is a particular composition. It's a particular kind of music. So what I love about formal poems is the music is very evident. Now, many readers who aren't, English students or poets themselves aren't necessarily even aware when they hear a sonnet. They just know, wow, I'm hearing something that sounds great, that's really delightful. And so the thing that where free verse has been very helpful is it's loosened up the voice of the contemporary sonneteer. So when I listen to Kathleen's sonnets or to Chris's sonnets, I'm still hearing a very natural, very contemporary voice, and yet partaking of the sonnet, which is one of our oldest forms. But really, it just reminds me that poetry is an ancient form and has always been, a form of song. So for me, just being able to hear and listen, and when I read, I take great delight and great pleasure in recognizing on the page the fact that the poem has been made in this particular way so that I can take it in. The form's there not to keep me away. It's a way that opens up gates and lets me go deeper and deeper and deeper into the poem. So a lot of my joy that I take in formal poetry is in reading it and knowing that it's still alive. And the last thing I'd say about that is I love it when I find contemporary poets writing in whatever form it might be, villanelle or rondeau or pantoum or sonnet. But it also lets me go quite easily back into the masters from the past who wrote quite naturally in forms. That was how they were all trained. And so it opens up a much larger world of poetry to me than if I were only reading contemporary poems in free verse. So I'm really grateful for everything that formalism does for poetry, even though, as you say, the poems that I read, very conversational, very free verse, but it comes from that knowledge of poetry's formal nature. Even to speak in the voice of a poet is really a very formal activity. It's a very formal gift that we're giving. So we want that best voice, that best articulation of our joy, of our grief, of our sorrow, of our triumph, whatever it might be. And I think those forms really, they're like when you go to museums, sometimes I'm almost more enamored of these beautiful frames around the Monet or the Renoir. The frames are so beautiful, and I think form kind of acts in that way. So yeah, form's always a delight.
Thank you. When you brought up the museum and the frames, the visual art, and you held up the covers to your books, which were visual art, this weekend of our poetry reading is also the weekend of the big Sugar Creek Arts Festival in Normal, when artists have booths in our streets and everybody gets to meet them and talk to them and see their work, which of course is not happening in the physical way because that wouldn't be safe, but it is the virtual Sugar Creek Arts Festival this weekend. So people are visiting each other in the way that we're having our poetry reading today. And so it's lovely that we have that connection as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Christopher Watkins and Richard Jones, I want to thank you so much for sharing your poems with us today and your comments about poetry. Our audience, thank you for coming. You've been attending Poetry is Normal Presents at the Normal Public Library in our virtual cafe. This is a program that's also supported by the Normal Public Library Foundation. We're very grateful for that. If you joined us here on Facebook Live in progress, so you happen to miss the beginning of the program, fear not. We have recorded this, and John Fisher, who's been broadcasting for us, will also place this reading at the Normal Public Library's YouTube channel, where you can see it at your convenience again, or rejoin it from the start. Chris and Richard, thank you so much. John, thank you so much for being with us here today.